Ages ago, before the personal computer and the smartphone, the Jersey-based Esterbrook Pen Company produced high-quality, affordable fountain pens with over 200 types of durable writing nibs. Today, the modern Esterbrook brand pays homage to the past by expanding the nib options available on the Estie fountain pen. In this video, we take an in-depth comparison of Esterbrook's current nib size offerings so you can decide which nib is best suited for your writing enjoyment. The pen is a deeply personal tool available in many shapes, sizes, materials, colors, and tip options to perfectly fit the writer. As there are pens to fit each hand, there are nibs to fit each handwriting style. While the Estie does use the common Jowo No. 6 nib, Esterbrook sets itself apart with the inclusion of specialty nib grinds to broaden the range of nib styles. I'll show you all of these Esterbrook pen nibs, starting with the standard range of Jowo nib sizes you might already be familiar with. For this writing test, I inked each Esterbrook Estie fountain pen with Esterbrook Cobalt Blue ink and wrote on Rhodia 80 GSM dot grid paper. Each nib was filled from the bottle and tested without any tuning or adjustment. In evaluating each nib, I focused on 3 points of concern for pen enthusiasts, which are line width, smoothness, and ink flow. Results may vary if you use a different ink or paper, apply more or less hand pressure, or due to differing nib manufacturing tolerances. All measurements were taken with a pair of digital calipers and a jeweler's loupe. The extra fine on this Cobalt Blue Estie has a tight controlled line that measures 0.3 millimeters in width. Compared with other thicker nib sizes, it lays down a small amount of ink, making for shorter dry times. Unfortunately, that also means you won't see an ink's potential shading or sheen properties. Extra fine is ideal for those who write small and prefer to feel the texture of the nib on paper. The relatively shorter dry time is a welcome feature for left-handed writers. The next step up to a fine point is only 0.05 millimeters thicker than the extra fine, yet it gives the writer a smoother experience. Since the line is still relatively thin, it is a good general purpose nib to use on a variety of paper types, including those that might not be ideal for fountain pen ink. Jumping up to the medium point that lays a 0.5 millimeter line. In this size, the writing experience is significantly smoother and the ink is more noticeable on the page. Although medium can also be considered a general use nib, it might encounter some feathering and bleed through on papers that aren't fountain pen friendly. The smoothest and broadest of the round-tipped nibs, Broad lays down a wet 0.55 millimeter line that will show shading and sheen on fountain pen friendly papers like Tomoe River, Rhodia, and Clairefontaine. A broad nib is best suited for large, quick writing styles and signatures. Despite the fact that it's called a 1.1 millimeter stub, this nib lays a thick downstroke of 0.75 millimeters in width. As opposed to the round nibs we've reviewed, the stub has a flatter, rectangular shape that yields a thinner line width when the nib moves from side to side. The stub nib's horizontal line rates at 0.4 millimeters in thickness, which is almost 50% thinner than its downstroke. This line variation adds a calligraphic flair to print or cursive writing. Extra care should be given to selecting an appropriate paper to write on, as the stub's ink flow can overload lighter papers. Also, despite the fact that the tip is broader than the broad, the stub's tip shape is prone to more feedback. Yet, if you love seeing the shading and sheen properties of fountain pen inks, a stub will put them on full display. If a 1.1 millimeter stub is too thick, but you still want to have a nib that has some line variation, perhaps a journaler nib is better suited for you. Custom ground from a medium point Jowo nib by Gina Solarino of Custom Nib Studio, this nib has a 0.57 millimeter downstroke with a 0.33 horizontal line. Its downstroke is comparable to the broad nib, while the horizontal line is between an extra fine and a fine thickness. In terms of smoothness, the journaler has slightly more feedback than the 1.1 millimeter stub nib. Ground from a standard broad nib by J.J. Lax, the Scribe Architect nib is the bizarro version of a stub nib. Instead of a thicker downstroke and thinner horizontal line, the Scribe nib writes a 0.38 millimeter vertical line and a 0.6 millimeter horizontal one. Flip it upside down to reverse write with a drier 0.27 millimeter monoline. In terms of smoothness, it's close, but I feel that the Scribe is just a little bit more feedbacky than the Journaler nib. If an extra fine isn't extra enough, put a pin in the Needlepoint nib from Kirk Spear. For cramming a semester's worth of notes on a 3x5 index card, the Needlepoint's 0.21mm line is up to the task. As you might expect from the thin line, the Needlepoint has the highest degree of feedback of all the Esterbrook nibs. To review the entire lineup of Esterbrook nibs, here's each nib in order of downstroke width. Then, by feedback. Last, by how much ink the nib puts on the paper. All Esterbrook nibs can be flipped over and written with upside down. This is also called reverse writing. You can expect a drier, thinner line that has plenty more feedback than if you were writing with the nib in regular position. The exception is the Scribe nib, which drastically changes its line when you go to reverse writing. So what about all those 200 plus nibs that the Esterbrook brand used to produce back in its heyday? To bridge the gap between modern and vintage, the current Esterbrook company offers the MV Nib Adapter section. This screw and grip section is engineered so that it can accept vintage Esterbrook nibs. Use the link in the description below to find out more about this accessory. You can also find all the pens and ink we mentioned here on the goldspot.com shop. Limited edition and seasonal Estie pens like the candy I have here are subject to current stock availability. Also, since the specialty nibs are ground by Nibmeisters, they can sometimes be difficult to keep in stock regularly. So if you see anything that you like that's out of stock, be sure to sign up for an in-stock notification and we'll let you know when it arrives. I hope that this nib comparison video helped you find the ideal nib size for your next Esterbrook fountain pen. You can check out more nib comparisons by watching the Lamy Safari nib comparison video here or the Kaweco Sport nib comparison video there. Subscribe to the Goldspot Pens channel to keep in touch about all the latest and greatest in fine writing. Thank you for watching and stay inky, my friends. Take care.